If you've ever thought to yourself, I'd rather just read about this than actually do it, you're not alone. The Enneagram 5 newsletter exists to help you move from knowing to experiencing. Every Saturday, you'll get insights designed to help fives grow without overwhelm. Sign up for free today at enneagram5.com/newsletter or visit the link in the description. Now on to the show. So since the purpose, or really our motivation behind this show, is to go past the stereotypes of 5 and really dig into what it's like to navigate life as an Enneagram 5. So maybe a good place to start might be, what are some of the stereotypes?
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
Or maybe before we do that, maybe we should say what a 5 is.
Yeah.
Do you want? I've got the Enneagram Institute. I've got that pulled up. Do we want to start there?
That's what I have too. I have the Wisdom of the Enneagram pulled up as well, which is all the same people. Yeah, let's do that. I guess we can start off on the base knowledge that if you're listening to this podcast, you know what the Enneagram is, and hopefully you're identifying as a 5 or have a 5 in your life, or are just curious that why we made a podcast about one type. Because I don't think anybody's doing that.
Because we're narcissists.
We are. We're completely full of ourselves. We think we're the best.
Do you want to read, or do you want me to read?
You start out. You've probably got a better summation over there. I've got more like tidbits pulled apart.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So 5s are alert, insightful, and curious. They are able to concentrate and focus on developing complex ideas and skills. Independent, innovative, and inventive. They can also become preoccupied with their thoughts and imaginary constructs. They become detached, yet high-strung and intense. They typically have problems with eccentricity, nihilism, and isolation. At their best, they're visionary pioneers, often ahead of their time, and able to see the world in an entirely new way.
Sounds pretty nice.
I like that, yeah.
Sounds pretty good to me.
They make us sound really great.
I know. Every time I read that too, I'm like, yeah, that's me some days.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I feel like I could live up to some of those expectations of a 5. Most days, no. But some days, I feel really good about myself. I think it's funny. So when I was rereading through the Wisdom of the Enneagram in preparation for this episode and kind of making my own notes and highlights, I found that they have the test in the beginning. Every chapter in the book, they have a test to see help you kind of decide if you actually are a certain number.
Oh, I haven't read that book yet.
Oh, it's massive, but it's really good. I recommend the digital version. It's much easier to get through, especially on an iPad. I read through this so much faster and just kind of skimmed through the parts that mattered to me. So they give you like this idea of a score, 1 to 5, 1 being not at all true, 5 being very true. Basically, it has a bunch of different questions and different things, or not questions, but statements. And I thought some of them, I think that, hang on, what were my colors? Okay. So as you can see, purple was the one that was the most like it. What?
You color coded it.
Yeah. That way this is like, here's my color, my key.
What a nerd.
Makes me so happy though. So anyway, I pretty much was purple on all 15 questions. And so I was definitely the 60 through 75. You were most likely a 5, but could still be another type if you're thinking too narrowly about type 5. But I've read all the others. I know I'm a 5 now. I used to think I was a 1 for a little while, but I
remember that. I never quite believed it, but I wasn't going to tell you what type you were. So
yeah, that's respectful. I can appreciate that. When I was coming out of like church world, and there's a lot of reasons for me to mistype as a 1. Just like in religious circles, a lot of women mistype as a 2 because of trauma and the patriarchy. So whole other episode. I went ahead and did the test again, and definitely scored on the highest range. It kind of goes into it a little bit and says that to kind of push into it a little more, 5 is the investigator. We have named personality type 5 the investigator because more than any other type, 5s want to find out why things are the way they are. They want to understand how the world works, whether it is the cosmos, the microscopic world, the animal, vegetable, or mineral kingdom, or the inner world of the imaginations. They are always searching, asking questions, and delving into things in depth. They do not accept received opinions and doctrines, feeling a strong need to test the truth of most assumptions for themselves, which is why I never got along with anybody in churches. They don't like it when you question things. But yeah, I mean, that I was like, that entire paragraph is me.
Yeah.
So there was no question.
Yeah, and that definitely gets me in trouble too.
Yeah, right. It's complicated because if you turn that onto other people, right,
you can come across as a real asshole.
Yeah. And I do all the time, sadly.
Yeah, you do. So a couple of things I wanted to touch on, because I like how they've broken it up into basic fear, basic desire. And so your basic fear is being useless, helpless, or incapable. And basic desire is to be capable and competent. And so the key motivations are you want to possess knowledge, to understand the environment, to have everything figured out as a way of defending the self from threats from the environment. And so I'm not sure if they get into this here, but I've read somewhere else that like a five's greatest fear is the world asking more of them than they have to give.
Yeah.
And I 100% can relate to that.
Right.
I'm aligned with that.
Yeah.
So now that we've laid out the general descriptions, I feel like these descriptions have really turned into memes in a lot of ways.
And Instagram accounts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so let's talk
Which I
through-
follow them.
Right. Yeah.
They're fun.
There's always a part of it that's like, I can find it funny because there's pieces of it that I relate to.
But it kind of does to the Enneagram what pop astrology does to astrology, right? Like it makes it this like super light-hearted, like, oh, it's kind of fun to read your whatever, which that's a whole thing, a whole other conversation. But I feel like it kind of does that. It kind of takes the Enneagram being this platform in an opportunity to grow and help others grow and create a community of healthy growth and healthy maturation. And I feel like that kind of is taken away from it when you are constantly just finding creating memes that poke fun at people for different things that are quirks about certain things that are stereotypes and generalizations.
Yeah.
One stereotype that I really don't relate to is the idea that fives don't care anything about their appearance, that they'll wear the same, black sweatshirt day after day after day and just don't care about things like that. And I don't find that to be true for me personally at all. I like to look my best. I like learning about colors and hair and makeup and clothing and all of those things that are not at all the stereotypical five sort of thing. For me, if I was to wear a black sweatshirt 5 days in a row, then somebody probably needs to check on me because it probably means I am not doing very well. And I know that's not true for everyone, but that's certainly the case for me. I love color in my life. And yeah, I care a lot about how I am presenting myself to the world in a physical way as well as mentally and emotionally.
So what is a big stereotype of a five that kind of gets on your nerves?
I think,
or that you roll your eyes at?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, here's the problem. So all of the things about a five that people are the most afraid of, I actually feel like I have most of the time. And so like I've always struggled with that. So I think if anything, I feel like the five descriptions reveal a little bit too much about fives. So then I'm like, no, stop. People don't need to know that because it makes us kind of sound, it makes five sound like narcissist a lot. And I don't consider myself a narcissist at all. I guess I don't like the way that fives are perceived as robots and detached from everything.
Cold.
Heartless. Cold and heartless, which like I am a lot of the time. I mean, just being honest, like I do feel fairly outside of the group all the time. And there's a lot of things about, like when you delve more into it, there are things about it that did describe a lot of my childhood and life that I was really surprised about, and that kind of made me realize, wow, I didn't even realize I felt that way about certain things. So I don't know. I go back and forth. There's certain things about it that is unfortunate and kind of annoying, and then other things that took me a lot deeper into myself and made me realize a lot about myself I didn't know. So
Yeah, I understand why people can perceive us that way. Because there's so much going on under the surface that we may not be expressing.
yeah,
And
CPU at 85%.
Right,
So
yeah.
you're just like constantly observing.
yeah, and also probably not in the moment most of the time.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's very false because you and I have talked before. I feel a lot. I feel deeply, and I'm actually a highly sensitive person. But I am also, and this also has to tie into, I have a really strong forewing, but I also am at war with those feelings all the time. And so especially when at my unhealthiest, like I just didn't know what to do with them. So I just sort of stuffed them down, but it doesn't mean that they're not there. And so that's something that I want people who aren't fives to understand, that we're not the robot, but we do feel things. But at the same time, and this is the weird part, is that also, like you said, I feel more like an alien than a robot, I guess. I feel like I'm observing and trying to understand and fit in. And so sometimes I feel like I'm just sort of pretending to be a human.
Yeah.
Even though I have my own feelings, I'm not like a sociopath. But sometimes I feel like a lot of the times what I'm feeling contrary to what everyone else is feeling.
Yes.
Around me.
Yeah, 100%.
And so I don't want to be disingenuous, but I also want to be empathetic towards the people around me. And so it's just this constant war of, what do I do?
Yeah. And how good can I fake this? Right. Like, am I leveling up today? Yeah, no, I feel that completely. Even with a 6-wing being the opposite direction of a 5. I don't know. I mean, I had a lot of anxiety level that you don't experience. And we've talked about that. I mean, I'm constantly feeling like I'm in my own bubble. Everybody else is out there and I'm in here. And yeah, the alien thing, 100%, I feel that. I think that I felt that way since I was a kid, like with my own family, with anything. I've always kind of felt like I'm out here and everybody else is in there. And, and it's funny because my brother, who also identifies as a 5, I always felt like he was a part of every group. And maybe we can have him on here and he can tell us that he also felt that way too. I don't know, but
Your brother's just so cool, though. Like
he is, and I think that, and he's been cool in different ways throughout his life. He was cool as a drummer and was the best drummer,
right.
And then he was cool. I mean, he was cool in the musician circles, and then now he's cool in his own like scientific way as a doctoral student in biogenetics. So like, he always knows everything. Like he is like the ultimate 5, right? Like he is the 5 we all aspire to. He knows everything. He's always one of the smartest people in the room, and he talks over my head constantly. So he only exacerbates what I would imagine are shortcomings in my mind of like how I'm not cool or I'm not in the group or I don't feel like I have a community or a family or whatever. Family in the general sense. Mom, I still think you're my mom. But I think I never got that from him. And so that was always a weird, unique experience, because if for somebody who identifies, like my dad is a 5 too, and he doesn't have any friends and chooses to be that way. He's like, I'm fine with no friends. I don't know. It's very strange to see that contrast in my own life and feel so different from the other 5s in my life that I grew up with and grew up around. So I don't know. It's really an odd thing.
Okay, a 5 stereotype that I think doesn't describe me is that we give insightful, well thought out responses or think extensively before speaking. This could be because I also have ADHD besides being a 5, but I think I'm pretty prone to blurt out. If I know the answer to something, I'm going to jump in with it pretty quickly. And I might even take it back later and find out that wasn't the right thing, or I might interrupt somebody and try to finish their thought. And I definitely do that to my wife all the time. It's something I'm working on. So I think in written communication, I'm able to do that much better. I can read it, digest it, think about my response, and type it out, and it's much more thoughtful. But in a conversation, I think I definitely struggle with that, and that does not align with the typical 5 stereotype.
Yeah, and it also speaks to the breadth of any type, right? That the expression of the number can look so different.
Right. Like how many shades of red are there? That's
Right.
how the Enneagram is. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I don't know.
So I have another stereotype or meme that kind of drives me crazy.
Okay.
And that is the meme of the disgruntled curmudgeon hermit.
Oh, yeah.
And this could be the fact that both of our subtypes are social, the social subtype.
Yeah. And
I know that, especially with the self-preservation subtype, this probably is more of a reality for them. But and this is something that I had to learn about myself, because I felt like I was supposed to be that way. And in some instances I am. Like, I definitely will retreat and need to into my own head and into my own space. But I also have this innate drive to belong and to fit in, and to, especially if I can be part of an elite group of some kind.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I am all about that.
Right.
I spent thousands of dollars being part of masterminds.
Just so you can be called a mastermind.
Right. And granted, there's definitely been a good return on that investment from a business perspective. But I'd be lying if I wasn't going to say there's a big part of the ego play in there for me too, of just being part of this group, of this select group of people who are successful in some way, or knowledgeable or something in some way.
Do you think that makes us? Because I'm definitely like that too. Do you think that makes us as fives more susceptible to multi-level marketing schemes?
That's a great question. I don't know. I've definitely succumbed to that in the past, like in college and stuff.
Same.
Yeah.
Not for long though.
Yeah. It doesn't last long.
Yeah. You realize I was roped in.
You unravel it pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I was roped in early on because my friend's dad was one of the success stories. So I sat down very personally and had coffee with somebody who was making millions and millions of dollars through this same thing. And so it was really hard to deny the supposed evidence. And I'm like, yeah, cool. But it's also her dad, and he did it in the 80s, and that some of those things really worked in the 80s. But it's as soon as technology advanced, like MLMs kind of fell out, and they weren't really what they were in their heyday. They kind of became the scams that they are. They kind of self-fulfilling prophecies. But I don't know. It makes me wonder, because like, if you want it bad enough, you can make anything in your mind a reality. So you'd be more susceptible, I feel like, to fall into that. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, maybe. It could also be our background, growing up in the conservative world.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't fall for it now.
Yeah, I think once we get in, because we're always trying to find the data. And when you look at the data on MLMs that I've seen, it doesn't look good. No. There are definitely some good success stories, but the vast majority of people,
it ruins their lives. Yeah,
so,
for sure.
I have no idea. This is not a conversation about MLMs though. So.
Well, okay. So if we reel it back in and go back to something you were saying, it's actually really funny, because we're talking about like how this is, in some ways, this is going to be kind of a commercial or promotion for this book that we didn't write. That's awesome. But
the wisdom of the Enneagram.
The wisdom of the Enneagram. But literally the next paragraph says, for better or worse, the areas that fives explore do not depend on social validation. Indeed, if others agree with their ideas too readily, fives tend to fear that their ideas might be too conventional. History is full of famous fives who overturned accepted ways of understanding or doing things. Darwin, Einstein, Nietzsche. Many more fives, however, have become lost in the complexities of their own thought processes, becoming merely eccentric and socially isolated. I just think that's funny, because we talk about how the deep desire to be socially accepted and sociable and all these things, and yet our personality becomes the antithesis of that in so many ways, and we isolate ourselves based on the way we perceive everything.
Right. Yeah.
So again, constant war.
Yeah.
So,
and in the social settings, that's exactly how I feel a lot of the time, and that's why small talk can be so mind-numbing.
It's torturing.
Yeah.
It's complete torture.
I have gotten to the point where it's not as bad for me, because I kind of make a game out of it.
Yeah.
But
in what way? Wait, you can't just gloss over that and move on.
As I'm talking to someone, I'm thinking about all the ways that I could manipulate them if I wanted to.
Yeah, you're not a sociopath or a narcissist. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I get that.
But I don't.
Yeah. If you're really good at it, no one would ever know.
You know of.
Yeah, if you're really good at manipulating, no one would know.
No, I learned early on, thankfully, from one of my mentors, how to use your powers for good rather than evil. So that's what I try to do.
Well, and, I got really into and really obsessed with body language. And so...
I remember that we were watching Lie to Me.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Lie to Me is what started it. And then I got into other things and read a bunch of books and actually just got 3 more books for Christmas. So, and in that way, I guess that is also, I think the strong desire to want the option to manipulate is just actually could easily be translated into that we want to always feel that we're in control of social situations so that we can feel safe and comfortable.
Yeah. And engage.
Yeah, and be able to engage and know, kind of be able to play out in our minds what's going to happen and not be surprised by anything or be attacked with a certain moment of vulnerability we weren't ready for or anything like that.
I also, it really depends on my mood too. And I think this is a conversation we can have at another time that I think would be really interesting to get into is how we handle and cope with and deal with social situations from different perspectives, or when we're in different moods or energy levels or something like that. But the other thing that I love to do, and I'm sure you've experienced this with me, is my 7 side will kick in and I'll either turn briefly, and this doesn't last super long, but briefly turn into the life of the party.
Yeah.
And just throw all caution to the wind.
Alcohol helps.
Yeah, well, it does. Yeah, but even without that, I just being dumb and this usually happens when I'm in the same room with someone like a 3, or someone who has like a big ego.
Yeah,
but I can
competitive nature.
But I can tell that I'm smarter than them.
Ooh,
and then then I'll just like create chaos. Just for fun.
Yeah, I love doing
and
that.
Get under their skin subtly.
Totally. Yeah. No, I completely get off on the idea of just making people either doubt their own beliefs and like making the foundation crumble a little bit. But in some twisted way, I probably think that I'm doing them a favor, right? By helping like wreck their carefully stacked boxes, Because the thing is, and this comes back to manipulation and less about knowledge. It's less about what you know and more about making them just question what they know. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you can do that to anybody.
Yeah. So the curmudgeon stereotype is one that I don't necessarily align with. And
for most of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, at my unhealthiest.
We've known each other a long time.
Yeah. At my unhealthiest, I am definitely the kid in the dark with the black hoodie on, watching anime and being angry at the world. Yeah, that was definitely me.
That's literally the definition of curmudgeon.
But that's not who I really am. And I think that's probably why the stereotype annoys me a little bit, is because it reflects a side of me that is not me. It's not my truest self. It's myself when I'm trying to hide. And that's not who I am. And so having good conversations, I like building quality relationships with individuals and small groups of people. I don't necessarily like large groups of people, but I'm definitely an introvert.
Right.
But I absolutely long for these quality types of relationships, because if for no other reason, I want to have really good conversations, and you can't do that by yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess you can, but
yeah, imagine this podcast with just one person,
Yeah. No one would sit here and listen to just me.
No, that would be a terrible monologue. Nobody wants to listen to a 5 have a monologue. That's always the beginning of a movie.
To be honest, we're not really sure if people are going to listen to 2 5s have a dialogue, so we'll see.
That's fair. Yeah, that's actually really true. That's the problem with all stereotypes, right? So if this podcast exists to break one big stereotype or one overarching stereotype of what 5s are and how they interact with the world, then that's a success and that's great. But every single number in the Enneagram struggles with the stereotypes of whatever those things are, I think. Sure. And that's something to acknowledge. I don't think that's just a 5 thing, but that's what we're talking about because we're 5s. But that's always the problem with stereotypes. But also, I mean, this is kind of going off on a tangent a little bit. I mean, there's positives to stereotypes too. I think that kind of helps. Because, I mean, you have to have markers. You have to decide where you're going to start the conversation and say, hey, well, this is right or wrong. But yeah, I mean, I think it's good to dive into those things and figure out like what things really connect with you and where we can hear from, other 5s and see what they're struggling with and what they roll their eyes at when it comes to 5 stereotypes and tropes and all the things. I don't know. It's always going to be an open and ever evolving conversation about what it is to be a 5.
science. I hate them. I was always more of the artsy literature kind of girl, but science I just never cared about. Thought it was really boring. And math, I just sucked at. There's something in my brain that just does not click with math. I could do it if somebody was sitting there or right after you taught me how to do something, but then the second I have to go do it alone, I completely I just couldn't remember. I could not grasp how I had done it. I didn't get it. That being said, I was the top of my class in geometry for whatever reason. I love geometry, but that was literally the only good math experience I've ever had. All of the other ones, it felt like it was a completely different language.
So let's move past the stereotypes now then, and let's talk. I'd love to hear from you what it means to you to be a 5. What do you really relate to the most?
So for me, it took me a long time to figure out what I am, I guess. And I guess I'm still trying to figure that out in some ways. I just turned 34 and I still just kind of feel so many times in my life I've started over, and so many times I've tried to figure out direction and figure out what it is I'm going to do. And, I spent a lot of my life being a musician and trying to do that and doing that whole life and traveling and touring and gigging and recording. And to this day, I still love that, and I love that the most. But that doesn't always work out, and it doesn't make money. So you have to figure out something else to do, or just choose to live under a bridge. And so and that's not good with a 5. 5s also have to be somewhat successful in what they're doing for it to be worthwhile. And so I've spent a lot of my time trying to separate my passions and what I love with what my life is going to be about, that at least keeps me alive and fed and healthy. And so that's been a real struggle of mine, because I spent half my life trying to decide what else I was going to be passionate about, because for me, it's also, it's weird. This is a really good example of a stereotype of maybe a 5-wing 6, where it's like a 5-wing 4, people already assume, oh, well, you've got the 4 wing, so you're probably going to be a little creative and eccentric and have these big ideas and whatever, which you do fall into that stereotype. And I've always been jealous of that. But here's the thing, I have the big ideas. I'm also creative, and I also love being creative. I approach it differently, and I have a whole methodology behind my creativity.
Yeah, actually, that is definitely another conversation that we need to have, because I love your approach to creativity, specifically songwriting.
Yeah.
And we don't have to dive too much into that here now, but I've always appreciated your ability to take something and sort of without judgment, just keep iterating on it. So you can put something out there, and then you can objectively look at it and say, okay, that's kind of garbage, but there's parts that I can work with, and you just keep working at it.
Yeah.
And I've seen you write songs, and when they start, they're just like, eh. And then by the time I'm like, wow. By the time you're done with it, it's like, wow.
Yeah, my biggest fault was letting too many people hear the first version early on, I think. So now I'm more careful about who hears which iteration of it. When I feel like, okay, this is ready to send out into the world, I'm a little better about that. We could definitely have a whole conversation about that, I think, and how that's different. But it's always been an issue. It's always been something that kind of dream that I would chase in many ways to my own demise, I guess, because I kept ending up at these dead ends and having to start over again with, okay, but what is my career going to be? Where is my time being spent that's going to put food on the table and have a roof over my head, right? Like that classic, the human needs. And that's been something that's been really hard for me to decide what that is, and try to figure out how to interweave my passions and my creativity into things like podcasts or projects that make me want to get up in the morning and still go about my day. And so that's always been a really hard thing for me. But what I have always identified with in descriptions of 5s is that methodical problem-solving mentality of taking something and tearing it apart over and over and over again, and figuring out how to put it back together in a way that works the best, right? Whether I do that at work, at any job that I've ever had, I look at systems in place and go, is this the most efficient way to do this? And oftentimes I've been the first person to challenge something and go, there's a better way. And everybody go, oh, or go, nope, not hearing it. Whatever the reaction is, and positive or negative. And of course, over time, and as I've gotten older, I think I've figured out ways to communicate those ideas in such a way that they're more well received.
Sure.
instead of being like, you've been doing this wrong the whole time, so that's something that I feel like I've had to grow in over time in my adult life. But, the problem solving title, the investigator, the observer, the problem solver is 100% me, and it's 100% my dad. It's 100% my brother. Like, that's the place that we meet on well. We love puzzles. We love tearing things apart and putting them back together and figuring out how they work. And so we've all ended up in different places. I ended up in the music world. And like you said, I tear a song apart until it works, and then I put it back together. My brother does that in the scientific world. My dad did it in the engineering world. And so that's where we've connected and kept a relationship going, even in a pandemic and in a distance, as we can talk for hours about the things we've taken apart and put back together lately. So it's a stereotype that I embrace and love and identify with.
Yeah, I love that. I think the way that I express that tends to be, I'm definitely a problem solver in a lot of ways, but I also, I tend to be more philosophical about it, I think. Like I pull apart the problems that really don't have solutions.
Right. You love questions with no answers.
Right. I just love exploring the question, It doesn't necessarily have to end anywhere. And actually, a lot of times I prefer it to not end anywhere.
Sure. And under certain influences, I also love to do that.
Sure.
But substance influence.
Right.
Like in a 100% sober mind, I don't know if my anxiety kicks in and I go, no, there has to be an answer. And we can have a whole conversation on that too. Do aliens exist? What is out in the universe? I start thinking about that. And on that note, I don't know if you saw the pictures of like when Saturn and Venus lined up recently. Did you see the pictures of the telescopes looking at them all around the world?
No.
I looked at these pictures and I don't know if you've ever seen it. I've actually, when we were kids, my dad took us out in the street. We lived in a cul-de-sac and he had this telescope it was like a $500 telescope. So better than the average toy telescope, but not the most powerful. But one night we were trying to look at the moon. I remember this distinctly. And my dad was like, wait, what is that thing coming out from behind the moon? And so he switched some things around and I don't know, I was like 10, so I didn't know what he was doing, but he was like calibrating all these things and moving things around and putting a new lens in or whatever. And come to find out, it was Saturn, and we could see Saturn. And I remember very distinctly looking into that telescope and seeing what looked like a sticker of Saturn. And I was like, oh my God, it looks the way that I've imagined it. It looks like the cartoons, the illustrations, and you can actually see the rings and all this stuff. And that blew my mind. And to this day, it's stuck with me that it exists in the universe right now. Or maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
Or maybe it's just a projection.
Right. Well, it is a projection, right? All of right. The universe is a projection. We're looking at things thousands of years ago. So that has always stuck with me. So then I think it was yesterday, I saw a picture. It was like a whole collage of images from when Venus and, was it Venus? It was Venus. Venus and Saturn aligned, created the Christmas star or whatever. That you see very distinctly, you see Venus, you see the gases and everything in these telescopic images, and the rings of Saturn. You can see the moons around Venus. I'm doubting. I think it's Venus. It has to be Venus. I had that same wonder that I felt when I was 10 all over again, going, oh my God, that really exists. Like, you don't think about it that often, but I hate it. I love it and I hate it. You know what I mean? Like, I think about it, and then I start thinking about how small we are, and then how did we get here, and what happened on the earth that made us exist, and what kind of evolution got us to this point, and then what's going to happen next. And so I start asking all the questions that I don't know the answers to, and I spiral out of control and fall into this weird nihilistic spiral, and it's not okay. And I get into a very dark place, and then I become the curmudgeon. So, yeah.
You've just described like an ideal evening for me of just sitting and thinking through all
and
that
that's
stuff.
why sometimes we have really good times, and sometimes I leave your house going, I don't know how to feel about anything anymore, and I don't know if life is going to go on tomorrow. So,
yeah. And
that makes you happy.
It does. I love it.
It makes you happy
It
because you
does.
created conflict
And chaos. Yep.
within your best friend.
So I've been thinking about this a lot too. This difference between problems that can be solved and problems that can't easily be solved, or maybe can't be solved at all.
Yeah, at least not from where we are.
I'm thinking about my career path, and it makes a lot of sense that I tend to lean that way, because I started more on the technology side and was moving towards, like, I was a software developer for a while. And that was interesting for a little bit.
Until it wasn't.
Yeah. Because those are problems that can be solved. And there's usually it's usually about just picking the most appropriate solution. But there's multiple solutions and you're really just trying to figure out like what's the best solution for this. And then I moved out of software development into product management. And most people don't know what product management is because why would they?
Yeah.
But it's essentially you're the one responsible for essentially figuring out what the engineers are going to work on. So you've got a team of designers and engineers that usually are being paid cumulatively $1 million or $2 a year.
Yeah.
And you're responsible for making sure that the business gets a return on that investment. So you're an advocate for the customer and the problems that they have, and you're working with design to figure out the solutions, and then with development to build those things, and then you're making sure that all of that is aligned with the business needs and goals, and then you're coordinating with like marketing and sales and customer service, and so you sit in the middle of all this stuff. And man, it's just a lot of making decisions where you know you don't have all the information, and you know that you may not ever know if this was the right solution, or if you do, it's going to be down the road and it's going to be too late to do anything about it, right?
Right. Then you just have to commit.
Keep moving. Or sunset something or whatever. There are processes and methodologies that you can use to help mitigate that risk, but there's always going to be that risk,
right?
And that just makes me so happy. Like, don't get me wrong. It's tough, but it's sifting through all of the mess and like trying to intuit how to move forward, and knowing that you're never going to know if that's how you should be moving forward. You just kind of have to move and then try to gauge, get feedback once you move, and like you're constantly, it's like sailing. You're just trying to navigate the wind and constantly tack back and forth to ultimately get in this general direction over here, but you don't necessarily know how you're going to get there.
Sure. Yeah. In many ways, I would agree that I think that I would be, that sounds interesting to me too, even with the opposite wing. That makes a lot more sense. Things that like aren't super tangible and you're having to like pull out of thin air, like what we're doing next, what direction we're going, this is the best course of action. So you're still kind of problem solving constantly.
Oh no, I definitely am, but I'm also doing a lot of visionary type stuff. So
sure, big picture.
Yeah, I'm big picture, but not just in this is the big picture. It's how do we tell a story that starts with the customer and the big relevant change in the world, and is motivating for the customer, motivating for the team, motivating for the stakeholders. Like, how do I help craft a narrative and make sure that everyone's on the same page, and then make sure that it's clear and compelling and consistent across the entire organization. And it's that to me is like the hard part, because there's like pieces of marketing in there, and and just there's a lot of communication stuff that's just, to me, is a big challenge as a 5, because that process of trying to get out of your head into a form that other people can understand
that's inspiring and romantic, and to some degree, right? Yeah, that's where the 7, you have to like really lean on the 7.
Well, lean on the 4. Yeah.
Well, the 4 wing, but then like go to this, like you have to be present it, right?
I do there's definitely performance in there for sure. I'm actually going to have to do that next week, my first real big one in a while. And so it's challenging, but it's like a good challenging, because I never get bored in that role.
I think one Enneagram stereotype is that I don't necessarily relate with is that they lack emotion. I definitely experience and feel emotion. I think the biggest thing for me is that I don't necessarily, sometimes I don't know what those emotions are, but I still feel them. So in certain situations, I won't react the same way as someone else might. And 2, I feel those emotions, but I don't give them any type of outward expression because it's uncomfortable. And so in those particular situations, I can definitely see why an Enneagram 5 would be stereotyped as not having emotions, but I don't feel like I necessarily relate to that specifically.
And that, I think, is where the kind of really the bottom line is that finding something that is a healthy and positive, constantly evolving challenge that you're always trying to overcome, right? I think that's as soon as you get bored as a 5, you're done.
I go into straight chaos mode.
Right. Like I need to just like, I'm going to burn this place to the ground. Right. And that's kind of,
it'll be interesting.
And that's kind of where I've been at my job lately. I think that I've been bored there for a long time because I had a list of all these things.
I hope no one there is listening to this.
They know. They have to know. But even in the destructive, if you want to call it I don't know if it's destructive. I think that I just constantly am challenging everything now and being like, is any of this the way that we should be running this place? You know, and I think that that's causing chaos, but it's also done a lot of good. Like we're
destructive doesn't necessarily mean bad.
No. Yeah. And in my case, I think that I have done a lot of things because I was bored and it turned out well for me this time.
Yeah.
Not most of the time, but this time it did. And in the process, I learned what it is that I might actually be good at, which is sales. And I didn't know that. I've run from that for most of my life. I've always been really good at selling things because it's manipulation. It's its own challenge, right? You're always trying
at its worst. It's
right. Yeah. Well, it's always manipulation. You're always all of sales and marketing is just telling people what
you're trying to get someone to take a specific action. Yeah.
Right. You're inception. You're implanting the idea in their mind that it was their idea that they wanted this thing while telling them this is what they've wanted all along. And that's targeted ads, which I am a huge.
That's a little bit cynical of a view on it, but yes.
That's what it is though. Yeah. Like. The basic functionality. But here's the thing. If you understand that as a 5, you understand that at the base level, you can sell anything to anyone. And I really believe this, and this is starting to sound like its own MLM. But
by the way,
have you heard of this product that we're selling? You know, and I sell alcohol. So that's the industry that I ended up in because
easy sell.
Right. But not always, because everybody's really picky about what they drink. And everybody thinks they know everything about what they're drinking. And that's always been like a challenge for me to be like, but you don't know. And so, so I think that's been a really interesting challenge for me. But then I got really good at it in a weird way, like, and not to sound conceited, but like I more than doubled sales since I took over at the department that I am in the store in the first 4 months. And so I like by far exceeded everybody's expectations. So then I used that momentum to go, well, we have all these case stacks of beer everywhere. We should have shelves. Let's spend thousands of dollars on shelves. And they were like, well, you did this right, so maybe you did this right. And then we did that, and then I tripled sales. You know, and it's like, and then now we're upgrading the entire beer department and building screens where there were chalkboards and building shelves to organize everything. And so I started with one goal, and then I made all the other goals happen. So for the first like 6 to 8 to 10 months, I had all of these challenges and all these hurdles I was trying to jump over. And then I was going one after another. And I was like, this isn't bad. Like I'm doing all these things, but I knew there was an end, right? Mm-hmm. So I gave myself a year to do all the things. I had a list of things that I wanted to do. My year mark was last month, and I had done all the things that I really wanted to really accomplish that I thought maybe would take me a year, and I did them in 6 months. So the last 6 months was trying to decide, well, what else can I do?
Yeah.
And so we've done a lot more than I ever thought we could do. And that's mostly because of the fact that I constantly needed the challenge. Yeah. And so I was just constantly questioning everything that could be done. And they hated me for it a lot of the time. But then at the end of the day, they were like, well, I guess this is better. You know?
That's so funny because I had an experience where when I was in college, I needed a job. And I just happened to have a friend who was going to school with me who was working at the local newspaper here in Chattanooga. And I got a job selling newspaper subscriptions door to door.
Yeah.
And I don't think we knew each other at this point. I think this was right before you and I met. I think it was like 6 months before you and I met. Because I was working at the airport when we met.
Right.
And I, especially as a 5, the idea of selling newspapers door to door sounds just like terrible.
Yeah, that sounds like hell for sure.
And I don't even know why I went for it. I think it was I just needed a job, and for college it actually was really good money. But I came in and I was immediately top salesperson week after week after week. Like my first several weeks.
Right.
But it was only because I figured out a formula. It was like I knew it was a numbers game.
Right.
I knew if I just hit so many houses and I had a smile, even if I was not great at a sales, like doing my sales pitch, some people are going to say yes. Some people are just going to say yes if you have a halfway decent product.
Yeah.
And so I came in and plus other teams were like working for like an hour and then going fishing on the clock and stuff like just
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
but
things they shouldn't.
So I was there, I think like 3.5 weeks and got promoted to a team lead. And I was making consistently $500 to $600 a week.
Wow.
And it was awesome, but I was like working myself to death.
Yeah.
And that was terrible. But I was making good money, and of course, I blew it all as soon as I got it. Like taking my friends out to dinner and like all this stuff,
Living it up. You're trying to have that elite status.
Yeah, there you go, exactly. But I did the same thing where once I sort of figured out my formula, I got bored, and so I just started like creating chaos.
Right.
So I remember one of the things. So I just started like just testing things and seeing what would work.
Yeah.
And I remember we were in North Georgia. And we had a route down there, and I was like, man, I don't want to do this today. This just, because it becomes soul sucking, especially because the way that the particular people who were in charge at the time were having us do things, it was very, very manipulative. Like that's where I had an aversion to any kind of sales or marketing for a long time because of some of the stuff that they were telling us to do. And I would do it and I would see it actually worked, but it felt really icky and it was not fun.
Right.
But then I just started doing like my own thing and just messing around. And so I would try like different accents when I'd walk up to the door. So we were in North Georgia, and man, I had a Southern twang all night long.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, it worked.
Yeah.
It worked, baby. So but that's like, I would just get bored and create chaos and try to see and then I could only do that. I think I did it for 3 or 4 months and I was done. It sucked the life out of me.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't think I could do that.
It's rough.
Yeah. That's like the trenches of sales, right? Like that's not,
you've got like 3 to 5 seconds.
Right.
To get someone to talk to you before they slam a door in your face, even if they open it at all. Yeah. It's really interesting. I learned a lot of little techniques.
Yeah, I don't think I could do that. My 6 wing would get in the way. I would feel the pressure to perform in such a short amount of time that I would blow it every time probably. And I've done that before. I've done phone sales type situations. I've done things like that before and had jobs like that where I felt like it was just constant pressure. I would burn out in a day or two. I'm like, no, this is not for me. It caused my anxiety to go up too high. And that was before I knew that I had anxiety. So I was always like, why is my heart beating hard and I feel like I'm dying? And this must not be for me. That's not something I could do. I've been trying to leverage the job situation I have now into a sales position and like a distributor level, right? And, but then you're going to places to sell things, but you're going into places that are already going to buy things from you. You're just trying to make them buy more things.
Right.
Right. And so I don't know. It's a little different. It's a different situation than going door to door and invading people's space, which is something you would never want someone to do to you. And now you're doing it to other people.
Oh yeah. And I've been nasty to some door-to-door sales. And it's so bad because I've been in their place.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I do it.
You're like, I know how you feel, but I hate you.
I actually had, when I was at my in-laws' house a few years later, one came from the same paper, came to the door, and he was so bad.
Oh.
And I was just like, I wanted to help him. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm just really annoyed that you're here. Yeah. So I'm just going to tell you to go away.
Yeah. At that point, you're like automatically assessing in your mind, is the outcome really worth it?
Right.
Nah.
Right.
Really. Is he even going to listen?
That actually is a great segue into thing that I relate to the most with a 5. And I feel like it's sort of probably not to like Enneagram nerds, but generally it's sort of overlooked as a key characteristic of a 5. But when I heard it described and they talked about this, I literally was weeping because I never felt so understood in my life. And it was the first time I had heard this and put it in a way that made it make sense, but it made me feel like there's not something wrong with me. This is just part of being who I am. And that is the energy management piece. And so for me, that is one of the primary functions of me as a 5, is that I am constantly doing calculus of energy and effort versus outcome, and what I want to put energy towards and what I don't, what I have energy for and what I don't. Is it worth the energy that I'm putting in? And there's a lot of like energy conservation, guarding that piece of me. And if I have anxiety, usually it's around that piece of it, where I feel my energy just getting drained and the life sucked out of me. I don't know if I've told you this whole story, Cody, but for me, it's just amplified and exacerbated because not only am I a 5, but I spent the majority of my life up until my mid-20s with chronic fatigue. And that's where I was when you and I met, which was real bad.
Right.
And maybe
somehow we were still friends.
Yeah, maybe you can speak to that, like what it's like observing that. But it was at its worst when we moved to Washington, and I just had a really stressful job, and I was working myself to death, and I was basically killing my adrenals, I think. But it was so bad that it took everything I had just to get out of bed in the morning. And when I was done with work, I would come home and I would lay down, and I didn't want to get up. I could sleep for 18 hours straight and never feel rested. I never, ever felt rested. And all I wanted to do was lay down all the time. And it was terrible. I never wanted to do anything. And I looked around at all these people, and I'm like, I must be really, really lazy, because I don't understand how anyone has motivation to do anything.
Yeah.
And I would also retreat into my head because of that, because I didn't have the physical energy. So I would, and I did have a lot of brain fog, but I could escape. And that's why I watched a lot of TV and movies and things like that too, because that allowed me to escape my body in a really efficient way. And I was always doing that math of what can I put energy towards? What can I avoid putting energy towards? And it's so ingrained into my brain that I'm still like unraveling that and trying to reroute those passageways, because while it can be effective to conserve energy, and there's definitely a time and a place for that, there's also a lot to be said for expending energy and doing it in ways that you probably wouldn't want to when you think about it. But once you do it, it's like playing with my kids. Or we went to the cardboard mountain at the local park, the giant mound, and we just like my 4-year-old wanted to slide down and go back up and slide down and go back up and slide down. And it was exhausting, right? Yeah. But every time, and of course it's, if you're gauging outcome for energy output just based on the experience, you're walking up this giant hill for a minute, and then you're sliding down for like 5 seconds.
Right.
You know, it's just like such an inefficient use of energy, it feels like.
Yeah.
But the look on his face of pure joy and the laughter, and just you can tell that it meant so much to him that I was spending time with him in this way.
Right.
That's priceless.
Yeah.
You know? And so, especially being a parent has helped me work through a lot of that stuff. But just to kind of close the loop on this, what underlying cause of, or what appeared to be the underlying cause of my chronic fatigue was some food sensitivities that I'm guessing caused inflammation that was affecting me in all different kinds of ways, but also affecting my sleep and all that stuff. And when I got that, man, I remember I changed my diet, and within a few days I was starting to feel better. And within a month I felt like a completely different person. I'm like, wait, you mean to tell me that everyone else feels this way all the time?
Yeah.
Like, what the hell, man? Like, I felt like a superhuman.
Yeah.
You know?
What could I have been doing this whole time?
Right. And then, of course, we moved back to the South, and my diet and exercise and all that stuff has slowly declined. And then I had kids, and now I'm not nowhere near like where I used to be, but definitely more exhausted. So that's a big, my primary focus and theme for 2021 is health and getting back to that place. Because of that, because of the extremely low physical energy that I had, I'm just that much more vigilant as a 5 about where I put my energy. And the interesting thing though is that I also spend a lot of time having some anxiety and warring with myself over that, which costs me so much energy, right?
Right.
So it's just like a self-defeating exercise. But when I think about being a 5, like that's the first thing that comes to mind is just this. I never felt understood. I always felt lazy. But what it is, it comes from that fear that we talked about of the world requiring more of you than you have to give. And so it's like you're always protecting what you have so that when it really matters, you have what you need.
Right.
And so it's very much a self-preservation tactic, but it's also a way of prioritizing things.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of shame around it for me for a long time. I feel like I've come quite a ways in sorting through that to where I can view it as, okay, this is a way my inner self is trying to help me preserve my energy. But let's just try to look at it more objectively. And one of the things that I also learned was that aside from the chronic fatigue stuff, my limits aren't as low as I tell myself that they are.
Right. Yeah.
Because I can push myself to limits and I still have more. And I'm not saying that I should be doing that all the time,
right?
But I can, in those moments, especially with things with like my kids, I can tell myself then I can change the story of like, I have more to give and I can choose if this is important, I can choose to expend this energy here. But man, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of inner work of like, there's always calculus going on of that energy dynamic. Do you experience the same thing?
I mean, I think that I do to some degree for sure. Yeah. And I don't know if I do it. I don't know if I do it in the way that you do on individual tasks. I think that I do it in bigger goals and things like what projects are worth investing time in. Does this have the potential to go somewhere? And then in my problem solving fashion, I tear it apart. I poke holes in this idea, or I poke holes in this direction and go, where am I going to fall? Where am I going to stumble? Is this going to fall apart at this point? Is the person I'm getting involved with this project going to not really believe in it halfway through? You know, all those kinds of things. And then decide from there, I don't know if this risk is worth doing this. I don't know if I'm going to just waste energy and then have to start over again. But as far as like daily tasks go, I've always been the kind of person who doesn't manage energy and time well in that way for my personal health. And I always stretch myself too thin and I always run myself to death, and I do way more than I should for way too long until finally I don't want to get out of bed and I'm too tired to do anything. And I go, wow, this isn't working. I have to reassess everything and restructure my life again. So I do it more I do like quarterly reflections rather than daily check-ins, I guess.
Do you have more of a manic depressed state in that way?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's always been this question of whether or not I struggle with bipolar disorder, or because I have a very cyclical emotional pattern, I guess it's very specific. And I go through, it's always like about 2 weeks of roughly like a week and a half of like, I'm fine. I'm pushing, I'm trudging along. It's fine. And then I get really, it's like, I just keep going up and up and up until I'm like hypomanic, like not quite manic. I'm not like hallucinating and losing touch with reality, but like my mind's going so fast I can't keep up with it anymore, and I run myself to death. And my mind is basically like a fire hose, and I can't keep up. And I'm having all these ideas and all these great, in my head, great ideas and all these things I need to figure out. And I get really honed in on random things for no reason and don't sleep for 3 days and then crash. And I have like 3 to 5 days, depending on what it is, like of just hardcore depression where I can't get out of bed and I don't want to do anything. And I have to decide, do I need this job? Do I need to still function like an adult? Does it matter? And then all of a sudden I wake up one, and it's like that in that way, it's almost like, to me, I've always described it as living in black and white for a while. And then one day I wake up and the color's back and everything's back to normal and I feel fine and I keep going. So that's always been a really weird thing. And I also, 5s in general have, and maybe I'm making a stereotype here and maybe this isn't true, but I feel like a lot of the 5s that I've met don't like to be out of control. And not in the sense that like how some other types are, like some other types are like 1s, you know, friends. I've known a lot of 1s who like, if they're out of control, they're not okay. but like, I don't like to feel like I'm out of control with my body. And so feeling
It's more about out of control of yourself.
well,
not-
yes. Yeah. I guess it's more out of control of myself. Nobody likes to be out of control of their environment, but yeah, self and feeling like my body is out of control and I can't do anything about it was a huge wake up call for me a couple of years ago or 3-4 years ago. Like I felt like things were getting to a point where I couldn't control how I felt anymore. I couldn't control anxiety. And I had to come to grips with the idea that I actually have these things and I need to call them what they are and deal with them. And that's been, a huge thing for me. And that's also defined very much how I have to decide how much energy I have for something, or if I'm just not in a mental state to be able to focus and do certain things on certain days. Like maybe I'm a little too manic today, maybe I'm a little too depressed today to actually give my full self to something. And I just need to have a self-care day, as the millennials say.
The millennials, as if we are millennials.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we are millennials, but, and that's where I've really had to learn that self-care is a real thing and you have to have days for self all the time.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Give yourself permission for that.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I love about being a 5 is we can take in information and like a lot of information and like sort through it, prioritize it, and can at the very least identify what to take action on.
And immediately apply it.
Yeah.
That's what I've always loved that about being a 5 is that I can learn something. I take something, I watch a bunch of videos, I watch a bunch of different things, and then I immediately go, okay, I know how to do this, and just immediately start trying to figure it out.
Yep.
I wasn't always like that. The risk was always, for me as a 6-wing, I think played into that, and anxiety. I wouldn't make the risk. I wouldn't do the things. And just in the last couple of years, or just in the last year, pandemic year, everything has kind of affected that where I'm just like, you know what? I'm always going to say yes to the risk. If I'm afraid of something or I'm too anxious about it, I'm just going to do it and see what happens. And if I fail, I fail. It's fine. I've failed a lot. It doesn't matter. And that's opened up so many opportunities for things that I didn't know I would be passionate about. And it's forced me to learn more about a lot of things that I already loved and didn't know how to do. And now I'm just immediately applying that information and just gaining momentum.
Yeah. And that I think is a key step in integrating towards an 8 as you become, healthier and everything. I used to be just a ravenous information gatherer. I knew so many things about so many things, and I had all of this theoretical knowledge, but then when it came to actually taking action on it, I would just freeze and I wouldn't do it. Because I could be, and it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because I would go to take a step and I can already think, like immediately just think through all the ways that it's going to fail and all the things I have to do in place to make sure that it doesn't fail. And then all the like extra tasks that go along with that to make sure that, and so I'm like planning out all of these steps in my head that I know I'm going to have to take. And then immediately that energy management thing kicks in. It's like, dude, that is a lot of work. Like that doesn't seem to be worth it. You should go do something else. Like, and I've learned, same as you, especially over the last few years, especially like when I'd left my job and became an entrepreneur and like was on my own and I just had to take action on things. I had to force myself to do stuff, because if I didn't do stuff, I didn't make money. I didn't, pay my bills. And so I got in the habit of taking action. And I think one of the things that I've loved about this period of growth for me is that I don't feel the incessant need to take in a bunch of information anymore. Like I still love to learn and I'll research things I find interesting. But there was always this fear of I need more information before I can take this action. And I don't usually feel that anymore. It's like, I'm going to take this action, see how it goes. And then I can kind of learn in real time and access information in real time as I need it, versus trying to think through everything, all the information I'm going to need beforehand and gather that before I take the action. Yeah. And that has been a real big breakthrough for me, and developing that habit of starting to take the action first, because otherwise, it's like you just said, man, you'll just sit and spin your wheels. Yeah, like what information do you need to take the first step? Right. That's all you need. And then you can figure out the information for the next step when you get there. I think that's been the major life-changing just difference in process for me to decide on a new project or a new thing. Is it's like, what do I need for that first step? All right, got it. Let's do this and see what happens. And then you can kind of assess as you go on whether or not it's worthwhile. Yeah, that's been life-changing for me, for sure. I feel like I can actually do things like make a podcast and hope that it works out, and but doing it well from the beginning and deciding,
deciding early on what are the first steps we need to make a good podcast.
Right.
Okay, let's go for that and then move on from there and evolve as time goes on.
Right. And I think we've done a good job with that. There were a lot of things the first time we set up. There were a lot of things that we both were not happy about.
Sure. Yeah.
There were a lot of things we both wanted to make better, but we knew that if we waited for those, we probably would never hit record.
Right.
So we just hit record, and we're like, if we have a crappy video, then we have crappy video.
And we did for a couple episodes.
Yeah. But the process has been really fun. And even if no one listens, like, I've enjoyed this. So
right. Yeah. I don't know. But then I think there's something tells me that people will listen and people will want to be a part of it. And maybe they'll feel like this is the first time people will get me and we can be a community together. And maybe we'll build something that we couldn't have done with anybody else and in any other situation. And maybe at any other time, because we've all been stuck in our houses for a year,
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I think,
so as Social Fives, we're actually now building the elite group of people we want to hang out with instead of trying to find them.
we have now graduated or leveled up, as the gamers would say. I love gaming. We've now leveled up. We're no longer looking for the community. We're just creating it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. That's what you should take away from this. When you don't like something, create it and decide for yourself that that's what the world you're going to live in.
Love it. I think it's a great place to stop.
Yeah, let's stop there.
All right.
Till next time.
Until next time. Hey, it's Josiah, and I wanted to say thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode and you're the type of person who likes helping others, would you do us a favor and share it with other people like you? If you found value in this conversation, they will too. I also want to give a special thanks to our community members who shared their voice with us in this episode. If anything in this conversation has resonated with you, or if you have any further thoughts or questions, I want to invite you to join our community of other people like you and continue the conversation at Enneagram5.com.